what we're going to be talking about Sunday night. Sunday night, we're going to introduce the theme booklet for 2026. We're going to talk a little bit about what some of our goals are and our vision for the coming year. And one of the things that we are going to talk about, so we'll just go ahead and have a spoiler alert here, we're going to be talking a little bit about evangelism in the coming year, trying to become more evangelistic. And so that's why our class this quarter is focused on motivating evangelism. Our class is just simply called Go. Next quarter, we're going to think about the second word in the Great Commission, which is teach. So we're trying to just motivate you to go this quarter by looking at a lot of different examples. There's workbooks in the back, and so perhaps if you've read through the syllabus and the list of topics that we're going to be studying, you've seen some of the things we're going to be looking at. But we're trying to overcome the fears and sometimes the negligence, the inability that we sometimes feel we have to go and evangelize. We're trying to overcome some of those things so that we can really be the church God calls us to be, and we can do the work God has called us to do and sharing His gospel with the lost world. And so that's our goal this quarter, is try to encourage you to do that. And to start that topic, to start thinking about this subject, we just want to ask a simple question. And that question is, well, why do churches decline? Why do churches decline? So we're going to think about that a little bit here this morning. We're going to, this isn't a morning, it's evening. We're going to think about this evening. And I want to start with this question. As you look at the general trend of churches in the first century, what was the general trend of churches in the first century as the early church began? Growing? Yeah? What'd you say, Jimmy? Growing rapidly. Okay, right. That's a great way to describe it. And of course, we would love to see, and we are excited when the church is spreading like wildfire. But that was the case in the first century church. In Acts chapter 2 and verse 41, just notice some key words as you walk through the book of Acts. Verse 41 says, those who gladly received His word were baptized. That day, about 3,000 souls were added. That's the addition word there, added to them. Look at Acts chapter 2 and verse 47. It says the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. Take a look at Acts 4 and verse 4. It says in verse 4, many of those who heard the word believed, and the number of the men came to be about 5,000. There were 3,000 in Acts chapter 2. There's 5,000 by the time you get to Acts chapter 4. Then you look at Acts chapter 5 and verse 14. You keep walking through Acts. Verse 14 says, believers were increasingly added to the Lord. Multitudes of both men and women. Multitudes of people being added to the Lord. Look at Acts chapter 6 and verse 1. Acts 6 and verse 1. It says, in those days, the number of disciples was multiplying. Goes from added to added to added to increasing to multiplying in Acts chapter 6 and verse 1. And with multiplication comes problems. And there were starting to be some problems in Acts 5, Acts 6. Acts 6 and verse 7, you see it says that many of the priests, it says multiplied greatly, verse 7, but it says many of the priests were obedient to the faith. You know, some people say, well, it's really hard you're never going to change a preacher's mind. You're never going to change a priest's mind. You're never going to change somebody who's clergy, their mind. Well, they were changing the priest's mind in Acts chapter 6. And that was an impressive footnote that Luke mentions there in verse 7. And then in chapter 8 and verse 4, those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word. And I think you have the reason why the church was growing, because that's what the church was doing. They were going everywhere preaching the word, and because of that, you saw this incredible growth in the early church. Now, you get to the end of the first century, and this is something that we talked about the last time I was with you. We were talking about the New Testament churches, and we looked at the 7 churches of Asia. And something we noted in Revelation chapter 2 and in Revelation chapter 3, when we looked at those 7 churches of Asia, there were 2 churches that were kind of on a downward trend. What was the problem? That with Ephesus, first of all, in chapter 2 of Revelation, and then of Sardis in chapter 3 of Revelation. What's their problem? Okay, they lost their first love, it says in Revelation chapter 2. And so he says, I have this against you. You've left your first love. You did a lot of things right. You're doing some things right, but you've left your first love. And so you need to remember from where you've fallen, repent, and do the first works. And if you think about Ephesus, the first works were, this was a church that it said in Acts chapter 19, they had taught everybody in Asia. So it was a zealous church, an evangelistic church. They were doing those types of works. And those types of works were leading to their growth. But they'd kind of gotten negligent, gotten lazy, gotten maybe content with just themselves. And they weren't doing those first works, and they were rebuked for it. So Revelation chapter 3, what's the problem there in Sardis? Dead. You have a name that you're alive. People think you're alive, but you're actually dead. I know your heart, and I know what the church is really like. So that doesn't mean you got to stay dead. He says, here's what you got to do. Be watchful and strengthen the things which remain that are ready to die, and remember how you have received and heard, and hold fast and repent. You've got to get alive again. Got to light a fire under that church. And so if they're going to change the downward trend, there was actions that needed to be taken. Jesus calls them to get active and to become zealous again. I'm not going to read this text to you. I just already quoted some of it. I want you to look at a few statistics while we're thinking about this topic, all right? So let's think about not Sardis, not Ephesus. We are living in the USA right now in the year 2025. So as you think about how the church is doing, just very broadly, okay? I'm not going to try to pinpoint the Helton Drive Church of Christ. I'm just thinking very broadly of the church in a very broad sense in the U.S. This is a Gallup poll, and it kind of explains some concern about church membership among U.S. adults in the past 20 years. And they're going from 2018 in this particular one. So 20 years to them goes back to 1998. So 1998, 70% of people who were asked the question, are you a member? And we're not even just talking about members of a church, just a church, a synagogue, or a mosque. In other words, are you going to a church, a religious organization somewhere? 70% of people in the U.S. in 1998 said that they were. Just 20 years later, in 2018, 50% of people said they were a member. Now, of those who said they were members, let's take a look at this next chart. This deals with weekly church attendance, because not everybody who's a member actually goes to church. Okay, so this is weekly church attendance, and this one takes you to 2020 on this particular poll. This is from Barna's State of the Church that they came out with in 2020.
I've got a question real quick.
Sure.
So I'm understanding what you're saying. This is a survey of churches of all
types.
Denominations.
That's right.
Not the church.
We are going to get to the church, though. But right now, it's very broad, very, very broad, okay? Just who claims to be religious, basically. So if you go back to, let's take a look at this poll. Let me look at my cheat sheet here, since my eyes can't see that very well. In 2020, the Barna Group surveyed some stuff. So in 2020, church attendance in 2020 was only at 29% of all U.S. adults. So take what we just said. In 2018, 50% of people said they were members of a church. But 2 years later in 2020, when they run a poll, only 29% of people are actually going to a church. That's less than 3 out of 10 people. Now, that's probably not the stats here in Florence, Alabama, but nationwide, those are the statistics. Take a look at some more. This is also from Barna, and this is a hopeful statistic. I don't want it to be all gloom and doom. But as of 2022, you turn a couple years further down the road, and it seems like church attendance in the country was starting to hit a low point in 2020, 2021. But it seems like there's a hopeful trend, and that is that there's an uptick in attendance in recent years. And so perhaps we're on an upward swing of the pendulum. And notice who was leading the charge in 2022 on the rise of church attendance. Millennials. You know, those are the people that sometimes get thrown under the bus sometimes by the boomers, but they're the ones who actually are excited about going to church, according to these statistics in 22, who are showing interest, who are wanting to go to church somewhere. When you take a look at the generations. In fact, look at this next one. This is the number of weekends that U.S. churchgoers attended church per month in 2025. That's this year, okay? And who is leading in terms of who attends church the most in 2025? Gen Z. Those bad young little punks. They're the ones who are going to church more than the boomers and Gen X and even the millennials. Gen Z, 1.9. They're going to church more, which says something to us. I think what it says is there's some interest among the younger generation. And we need to make sure that we are paying attention to that interest and talking to them while they're interested in spiritual things. By the way, that's not very good church attendance, though, for anybody. Elders all the way down to Gen Z. 1.4 times a month is how many times people on average went to church that were going to church. That's not great. Now here's the other hopeful statistic. Church attendance is on the rise for all young people, but especially men. There's more men that are starting to go to church now. If you take a look at the red chart, those are all men, the ones that are in red at the top. But Gen Z, notice the spike there in 2025. Notice the spike among millennials in 2025. Notice the spike on the very end of the graph on Gen X men in 2025 and boomer men. There's been a spike too. Men across the board have begun to start taking an interest in coming back to church again or going and learning. Now, there's been an uptick everywhere, but there's been actually more of an uptick with men than with women in the past year. So I think that's kind of interesting. And just take a look at this. The stats are higher in Alabama. If you take a look at the green there, the dark green is where Alabama and Tennessee and Kentucky and Mississippi are. They kind of have the highest rates of church attendance of anywhere in the country. That makes sense. We're in the buckle of the Bible Belt down here, right? But things are not quite as good up in Indiana and Ohio and places where I've spent most of my life. The church attendance is about 10% less among U.S. adults in those states. All right. Now, well, there's been a slight uptick. If you look at the broad picture, even though there's kind of varying statistics and hopefully some hopeful statistics, broadly speaking, in the last 20 to 25 years, the majority of churches are declining or plateauing. So what do you think some of the reasons are for why that's the case? Letting the world creep in, more interested in worldly things than we are the things of God. Okay. Materialism. Yeah, there's just so much to do. Just too busy. It's true. We're very busy with a lot of things today. Just too busy for church. Don't have time for it anymore. Okay. Lack of true conversion. I think that's a good point. Just disinterest, lack of commitment. Sports. I would put that in that materialism or worldliness category. Sports. I think that's a great point, Mel. I think a lot of travel sports have taken over. I think a lot of you older folks would probably remember a time we didn't play sports on Sundays and everybody canceled practices on Wednesday nights, and that is not how it is anymore. If you play sports. Sports is God for a lot of people. It's everything. Will?
What I hear a lot from my age groups and older is listening to media, social media, traditional media, with how easy access it is now. Hearing, Catholic Church, Baptist, everyone's with pedophile rings. There's stories of people sharing religious trauma and blaming the people and saying, well, this is how what I see on the news and social media all the time, I want to be part of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the scandals of the church have gotten a lot bigger publicity, and it is so easy for people to air their grievances now because of social media. It's a good point. Any other thoughts?
I think parents have a lot to do with it. They're not putting faith as their top priority. If they're involved in, they're letting their children you're showing your children what's really important.
Parents need to make it more of a priority and instill those things, that faith is important with our children. Sure, TJ?
A co-worker and I had a little discussion about this one day at work. We was talking. Just like when you change the time. When do we change? On the Lord's Day. Okay. If we mess up and forget to change the clock and we're late, well, it's church day. I'm not supposed to go to work today and stuff. I think about that a lot. By the way, 2 years ago I came here. I was an hour early. Why I had to come down and get something out of his office to send me back home for an hour. But really, that should be the most important day of our life, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And you make that change. To me, it shouldn't be made on the most important day of the week. It should ought to be made on another day. But that's just an example of how I think about people look at things nowadays.
Okay. Well, of all the answers, I wasn't expecting time zones to be one of them, but I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Let's do that on a Monday so we can miss work and not church. Okay, I got you. Did you have a hand up earlier, Anna? I'm sorry.
I think religion has become a very personal thing to people, so they don't believe they have to have a membership somewhere, even though they're religious and believe.
Okay. I think that's a good point. Yeah, the whole movement, I'm spiritual but not religious, and so I don't need to be part of a church. That's a big movement, and I think that needs to be addressed, certainly in our teaching and how we answer that, because that is very common. All right, so here's a few ideas. These questions really just offer some ideas to think about. But according to some statistics, only 1 in 7 preachers are under the age of 40 today. You think that's kind of a scary trend? When our preachers are all kind of aging out of preaching and we don't have enough young preachers coming up? Why do you think that's the case?
Well, if the number in all is going down, so is the number of people that are interested in preaching.
Okay.
And it's bound to go down with that.
As the church declines, so does our pool of preachers. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it has to do with the churches today want a young preacher who's real enthusiastic and a lot of energy and things like that. Well, they hire one and maybe he doesn't have enough of the maturity to suit their needs, so they're unhappy with him, so they let him go. And others see that and they think, okay, do I want to take that chance and take a job that I'm going to be fired if I don't handle things just right? I know all the years we've looked, they always wanted a young preacher because of enthusiasm, but they forget that they don't have the maturity necessary to handle rejection and when we were young and when you were younger, you thought you knew it all. Ed thought he did. I thought he did too. We found out he didn't. So I think that's some of it with young preachers. They see young preachers having a hard time finding a place to settle into because the church is really.
I heard the young preacher speak before the congregation recently, and he had been considering being a preacher full time, and he'd been studying with other people, but his answer was that his wife and his children had a big priority in his life, and that he had decided he would not
Preach. Yeah. Well, I think for a lot of preachers, I think they're scared of that things could go wrong and I could be sent packing, and I want the stability of maybe of a job somewhere. Hopefully you picked one that AI is not taking over as well, because instability exists in the workforce as well, not just in preaching. But I think you're right. I think sometimes a lack of patience with younger preachers can be a concern, and then they get discouraged. Here's what I really want to focus on. 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 2. It says that we've got to be taking what we've been taught and teaching faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So we need to have young, capable men who are, at least in some way, willing to teach and to preach and to share the gospel. We need that. That has to be a focus of ours. It's God's will for the church, and we need men to have some courage to take the challenge. It might be a little bit scary to jump in there, with feet first and take that challenge, but we need men who are willing to take that challenge.
But that's one thing we do here. We encourage, and you and the elders let the men that are wanting to and capable to preach lessons, so they can develop and see if that might be something. And in the future, we might have a second preacher here that could be tutored by you, and you know what I'm saying.
We might, Jimmy. We might. Absolutely. Sooner than you think, maybe.
That's what Paul did, and all of those people around him that he was helping develop Timothy and others, and what better way to learn to be a preacher?
Absolutely. I'm with you. And I do think the church here is trying to encourage that, and that's great. We need churches everywhere doing that. We need young men everywhere doing that, and churches doing that, because there's a lot of horror stories from younger preachers. They're scared and have gone through some tough times, and so we need that. Now, this is something else that was mentioned, materialism. How has materialism affected our ability to reach some people today?
We are an overabundant society. So as times progress, people have more stuff, right? They have more things to do, and they have more material things to do. They're less concerned about trying to find answers elsewhere. They're not, I can just get more money, I can buy more things. Good. Whereas before, if you didn't have to have as much money, you had to just be study. That could be a part of it too. It's just, as we've grown richer as a society, the majority of people are like, well, I don't need God. I can just go out and do it for myself.
The rich fool mentality. I've got bigger barns to build. I'm just going to enjoy life here. This earth has become my heaven. And so I'm not focused on things to come because life is so good here. And sometimes we get so comfortable here, we forget about here is temporal.
I think those people think God has blessed me because I have made this much money and because I have so much stuff, which maybe that's not why they have it. Maybe they spent more time working toward that and not seeking God. And maybe he'll take it away from them someday, maybe not.
Take a look at Acts 24, verse 25. Acts 24, verse 25. This is when Paul is trying to reach out to Felix, and it says that he was reasoning with him about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. And Felix was afraid, and he answered, "Go away for now. When I have a convenient time, I will call for you." I think there's a simple reason why Felix did not want to respond to the preaching of Paul in this instance. It wasn't a failure of Paul. It was that he was materialistically minded. He was living the good life right here, and he really didn't want to have to live a sacrificial life, the type of lifestyle that Christians are called to live, that's others-minded. He was very into himself and his own life. And so it can be difficult in a materialistic culture for the gospel to reach people's hearts. I think that's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we're going to have to try to face. Someone else mentioned entertainment. There's just too much entertainment, and that's in one of these questions as well. How has an entertainment-driven society affected both our time in evangelizing and in others listening to evangelism opportunities? Sitting and watching football for an entire day. That's very specific, Allison. I think you're right.
Sitting and watching your phone or your computer all day.
We're spending way too much time on the phone and computer and the TV, and it's not that we don't have time. It's that the things we're making time for are very inferior and unimportant compared to the things that are eternal. Russell?
Similar to what Caleb said about us having so much material things, we're a very overstimulated society where you look at movies that the gore level wasn't, everything has to be beyond reality almost to what we look at. And the YouTube videos that the little kids are watching, and they just swipe and they don't get 15s, and they're just so overstimulated to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. They don't have time for a slow church and God, and everything has to be so overstimulated.
And that's the goal of the algorithms, right? To get you hooked, to get you addicted. So those are things that we have to address, things that we're going to have to confront if we're going to reach the gospel to others. And if we ourselves are going to make time to share it and to be receptive of it ourselves. Take a look at 1 Corinthians 10, verse 7. And it says, there's just an interesting phrase there that describes the people who were practicing idolatry as Moses came down off the mount. It says that don't become idolaters, as were some of them. And it says, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up to play. That's all they cared about. What are we going to eat next? What are we going to drink? Where's the next party? Let's have some fun. And these were not people who had God in mind. These are people that had their own entertainment in mind. And so that's condemned here. That's a challenge. Take a look at a few quotes here I'm going to share with you. This is from Tom Rainer, who's done a lot of research on church and kind of the broader sense, more the evangelical church here. We're not talking about synagogues and mosques as much, but evangelicals in that broad sense. But he says, few people will argue that church attendance in many churches in America is declining. Our own research indicates the majority of churches in our country are not growing. Most of us have our own ideas why attendance is declining. Many have suggested that our nation is shifting away from its Christian roots, and thus the churches are declining as a smaller proportion of our country are believers in Christ. He said, I certainly will not argue with that premise. Certainly attendance declines are related to massive cultural shifts in our nation. But I would also suggest that one reason for declines has a greater impact than others. Stated simply, the number one reason for the decline in church attendance is that members attend with less frequency than they did just a few years ago. Allow me to explain, he says. If the frequency of attendance changes, then attendance will respond accordingly. For example, if 200 members attend every week, the average attendance is obviously 200. But if 1/2 of those members miss only 1 out of 4 weeks, the average attendance drops to 175. Did you catch that? No members left the church. Everyone is still relatively active in the church, but attendance declined over 12% because half the members changed their attendance behavior slightly. This phenomenon can take place rather quickly in an individual church, and leaders in the church are often left scratching their heads because the behavioral change is so slight, it's almost imperceptible. Now, we really don't notice when someone who attends 4 times a month begins to attend only 3 times a month, nor do we typically catch it when the twice-a-month attendee becomes a once-a-month attendee. But the heart of the problem with the declining attendance is not declining numbers, but it's waning commitment. Seeing people less committed today. And it's not that they're completely always leaving the church. Sometimes it's just they're not attending as much. So thus, he's explaining kind of the shift in less attendance. Now, this is more addressed to churches of Christ. I really hate using that phrase. It's kind of used in a denominational sense I don't really like, but I hope you kind of understand what I mean. Just for research purposes, this is from the Christian Standard. They wrote this: the churches of Christ were first recognized as a separate religious body in 1906. That's the first time they were recognized on the census. That's what it means. The church was established in 33 AD, but on the census, first time it got recognized as a religious body in 1906. At that time, there were 2,649 congregations with 159,658 members, an average of 60 people per church, according to the census. 40 years later, their size had quadrupled to 10,000 congregations and 682,000 members. That's about 68 per church. So churches were growing, and of course, congregations were being planted, and members were also growing. Attendance in churches of Christ peaked in about 1985, and it has been in decline since about 1990. As of 2010, Churches of Christ had 1.6 million adherents. That'd be the 13th largest so-called denomination. I don't like the word denomination either apply to the church, but for sake of their report, just kind of roll with that. 12,584 congregations, the seventh most. In the report, Churches of Christ in 2050, Tim Woodruff and Stan Gramberg wrote that Churches of Christ have lost more than 2,000 people in 9 congregations a month since 2015. It's clearly a decline. You're losing 2,000 people a month. 9 congregations a month closing their doors since 2015. Interviewed for this article, Gramberg said, "My personal expectation is that by 2050, we will be about 1/3 the number of churches and members that we were about 1985, our high point. If that occurs, Churches of Christ would have about 4,000 congregations and 400,000 members by 2050. Data this year from 21st Century Christian indicates there are 11,875 Church of Christ congregations in the United States. Total attendance is over 1 million. Total number of adherents, both baptized and unbaptized, about 1.4 million. That was from a 2021 article. Now, hopefully we've seen a little uptick here recently, but I think even in our area, if you just even know a little bit about congregations in Alabama, we've seen congregations close their doors because we've seen numbers declining. And so this is something that has to be addressed. Well, how does it get addressed? It gets addressed when we start teaching and practicing evangelism. That's why we're having this class. We've got to become more evangelistic as a church. Now, an ecumenical philosophy, I think, has also affected it. The idea, well, I don't think you're wrong. Let's just agree to disagree. That's kind of the ecumenical philosophy. And the lost have to be reminded that Jesus is the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but through him. We cannot have that ecumenical philosophy when it comes to how we approach people in the church, or in that broad sense. And of course, the general beliefs of the world regarding morality. You've probably seen statistics on the rise of the nuns. There's a lot more people who just claim, I don't have any religious affiliation. And if you don't have any religious affiliation, that's going to affect you morally because you don't really have a moral standard. And so the rise in immorality and just the lack of having any type of moral base, that's obviously going to affect our ability to talk to people and to reach people with the gospel as well, because they call good evil and they call evil good, as Isaiah chapter 5 mentions. All these things are challenges. So question, because people have an ecumenical approach and the world is getting more worldly and people are materialistic, should the church change to accommodate the culture? That's kind of a loaded question. But should the church change to accommodate the culture? In what ways should we change? And in what ways are we forbidden to change? We can't change? Okay.
We have to follow the truth.
Okay, we can't change the truth.
Adapt a little bit. But you can't change the basis.
All right, we cannot change the truth. We cannot change the standards. The truth is the truth. We cannot alter that. That is what needs to be preached and taught. Right. We might change the approach. How will we change the approach?
People today aren't going to listen to hellfire and brimstone preaching like T.J. Larimore did, mentioned the other day. That kind of thing. They're too easily offended by that. So we've got to, again, never compromise, but maybe take a gentler approach with a lot of people. And even Scripture teaches us that. James and Christ and his approach and those kind of things. But if we start out telling folks you're wrong, then they're so easily offended they're going to walk away. They don't want to change.
Okay.
I was going to say, church is obviously adapting to different miles. I've gone here in 30 years because you focus on different things. And like Jim said, the way you do it, your culture changes. I mean, you don't preach the exact same way. I'm sure they would say the same thing in other countries. Because people are different. Now, you teach the same things, like I said, the way you go about it, maybe the things you focus on. Those all kind of change. You get in with them. And when they start hearing and know you're not just walking up on the street saying you're going to hell. Thinking you hate them, and no, I love you, let's talk about some stuff that's very important. So we've always adapted. It's just, being careful.
Paul said he became all things to all men, right? I don't think Paul changed the truth, but I do think he understood there was a difference in how he was going to have to approach a Jew and how he was going to have to approach a Gentile and in those particular situations. That's what I'm talking about a little bit here. Let me mention something that I had another chart that I hid on my slideshow. But a lot of people after COVID, how'd they start listening? TV, online. Whether you like it or not, I don't like it. I think God wants you to be with the church and be with his people and assemble. But I will tell you, there are a lot of people that they are looking for, if they are looking for answers, they are looking for it online. Is that one way in which maybe we're going to have to change our approach? If we have the ability to share the gospel online, which we are doing, we're live streaming, and we're trying to get on, Facebook and social media, and I need to get on TikTok probably, but I'm going to get hated if I get on there. But it's okay. Jesus was hated too. There's only so many hours in the day, but there's other ways perhaps we need to start thinking about approaching people. That's what I mean when I say, do we need to change to accommodate the culture? Not change the truth. We can't change it. But how we approach bringing the gospel to the culture.
We have to. I mean, correspondence courses in the newspaper was a way that we got people. Nobody's ever going to see that if you do that now. So you would have to use some platform, social media, so they can at least see it and have an opportunity.
And the churches that are using online correspondence courses, they're getting a lot more traction right now than the paper ones, for sure.
You can't advertise in the yellow pages anymore. You can't do a newspaper on, correspondence.
That's kind of what we're talking about there. Okay. Appreciate you.
TV preachers come on here in prime time TV.
Yeah.
Tell you, if you want to be saved, all you gotta do is say this prayer. You're saved.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people believe that. Young, practical, and all that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate your all's participation, good participation. We could have kept